This video will discuss overall strategy for the On Mars board game. On Mars is a game where you're building up the structural foundation for a Martian colony. On Mars has 5 different material resources: minerals, batteries, water, plants, and oxygen. Oxygen creates shelters, which houses additional workers. Then whenever you build a mine, you place a worker on the mine, so the cycle of resources comes all the way back around. A core portion of the game is creating groups of buildings of the same type, called complexes. When you successfully create or extend a complex, you gain resources equal to the size of the complex. So theoretically, you could spend multiple turns starting a mine, then building a generator complex, get some batteries, build a water extractor complex, etc. in a cycle. Resources also have an alternate use. Minerals are also used to construct advanced buildings from blueprints. These automatically produce resources when you go from the colony to orbit side, as well as unlocking more executive actions you can take in addition to your normal actions to increase your turn efficiency. Batteries are used to purchase technology, which enhances your overall capabilities. Water and plants are used to welcome a ship, which is the primary way you get more workers and robots. Finally, oxygen is also used to upgrade technology. Another interesting design for this game is that the game board is split into the orbit side and planet side. The orbit side is for gaining tech and resources. The Mars side is for most of the point scoring actions in the game. As the game goes on, you'll be going back and forth less often, tending to stay more on the Mars side. Let's take a look at endgame scoring, since this gives us some hints on how we should be using our actions. The first is the LSS scoring. The game encourages you to either create a complex or increase the size of a complex at least once for each type of building excluding minerals. You get 11 points if you create a complex for all 5 resource types. The second is 3 points for each ship we welcome. The number of ships we can have is determined by the current colony level, so usually you'll have 3 or 4 ships. Next is the colonists in the living quarters. At the highest level, you can score 21 points, which is a substantial amount. The next scoring is from upgraded tech. Tech is acquired using batteries and upgraded using oxygen. 3 technologies upgraded as far as they can go give 19 points, but you can get more points for more tech. Next, advanced buildings are scored at 3 points per level 1 advanced building and 5 points per level 3 advanced building. Next, each scientist scores 3 points per the indicated advanced building on the board. Finally, Earth contracts are scored based on their value. In general, throughout the game, I would put the most importance on 3 overarching objectives in no particular order. The first is gaining and upgrading tech using batteries and oxygen. The second is building shelters, then welcoming ships to add more workers using oxygen, water, and plants. The third is gaining blueprints and building advanced buildings using minerals. Each of the game's resources are readily available in different ways. However, I would put an emphasis on oxygen and minerals. Oxygen is used both in building shelters and upgrading tech. Minerals build advanced buildings, which contribute to both points and overall efficiency using additional executive actions. The game has an open sandbox sort of feel, but here are some considerations when starting. I would think about the building type that starts nearest to your starting shelter, the scientist associated with that resource type, and available blueprints. Secondary considerations would be which LSS rewards are associated with each complex type, and the missions that trigger the end of the game. Like most types of building games, you want to be as efficient as possible with your turns. In On Mars, more efficiency on your turn implies using executive actions to do more stuff, and passively gaining resources by building advanced buildings from your blueprints. You should aim to gain at least 1 scientist, since this will let you take corresponding executive actions for free, in addition to some extra in-game points. Let's take a look at the blueprints and what they do. I'll categorize each of the blueprints as either always take or situational. Remember that you can score points for your scientists based on the buildings, so it might be a good idea to take blueprints anyways, even if the action isn't that useful. Keep in mind the 3 general objectives: tech, workers, or advanced buildings, as well as executive actions that let you take orbit side actions while on the Mars side of the board. Construction yard. You can upgrade 1 building, boostable to upgrade additional buildings. Advanced buildings are central to this game. I would say this is an always take blueprint. Metal deposit. You can construct a mine, boostable for extra tech. There's a similar blueprint for each type of complex building. The advantage of using the blueprint as an executive action is that you can boost it for tech, So early on, if nobody has the right tech, then you would have the advantage of building a complex and potentially moving up on the LSS track. Or if you just don't want to use someone else's tech. Note that you don't move up on the LSS track for minerals, but minerals are used for building advanced buildings, which are always important. For metal deposit, I would say always take this one. Mineral Mind. You get to score 2 points for using this action. This could be good for the last couple of turns if you can't find points elsewhere. I'd say this is situational. Biolab. This lets you take 1 Earth contract. Taking an Earth contract can be difficult since you have to go to orbit and come back to remove your worker. Being able to take one as an executive action is great, but ultimately I think this is situational. Batteries. Automated production. This lets you produce resources and is boostable. Resources are relatively easy to come by, but if you need the extra resources, it's always good to have an executive action that scales as the game goes on. I say this is always take. Wind turbines. This lets you construct a generator and is boostable for extra tech. This is same as the previous mineral blueprint, but for batteries. Batteries are only useful as the number of available technology, so I would say this is situational. Radar. Use a discovery tile as an action. This is only as good as the discovery tile, so it's inherently situational. Builder droid. You can upgrade a building anywhere on the map. This bypasses the requirements of your robots being adjacent. Construction yard is boostable for more buildings, while this one is only once per action. However, it's still very useful, and I would always take this one. Water. Private ship. Welcome a ship with an extra colonist, and is boostable for an extra ship. The number of ships is limited by the LSS level. If you need the extra colonist, potentially useful, and it's better if combined with a colonist tech, but mostly I think this is situational. Moisture Vaporator. Construct a water extractor and is boostable for extra tech. Same as the other type of executive actions that let you build buildings, but it could be more useful if you have a good colonist strategy brewing. I'd say this is situational. Research Lab. Develop a tech, boostable for extra develop. Better tech is always good since it accelerates the game state and the amount of points you could potentially receive. This is much better if you can acquire a good amount of oxygen, and makes it so you don't have to go to the orbit side. I would always take this one. Aqueduct. Move 2 colonists to the working area. Boosting actions is always good if you can afford it. It's better in the late stages since the shuttle moves slower. Presumably you also have been going through a colonist heavy route anyway, so it could be a good use of an executive action. Always take. Plant. Biomarket. Take 1 crystal or resource. This is much better if you have the scientist, but replaces an orbit side action. Very good early on if in conjunction with a complex extending tech like hydroponic farm. Limited by the amount of resources in the bank, but it's good early on. I would always take this one. Hydroponic farm. You can construct a greenhouse and it's boostable for extra tech. Same as before, I think this is situational. Eco Resort. Return all colonists from action slots on one side to living quarters. Returning colonists from action slots can be very slow, and I think this is incredibly good and an always take blueprint. Trade Market. Trade resources, boostable to take additional resources. The game encourages diversification, but this allows you to specialize in one resource, potentially building huge complexes, gaining the resources, and trading them away. I think this is always take. Oxygen. Oxygen tank. Take 1 tech, boostable to gain more tech. Makes an orbit side action and executive action. I think this is always take. Concentrator. Construct an oxygen condenser, boostable for more tech. Same as before, but given the importance of oxygen in general in this game, I would always take this one. Recycling bots. Move bots as rovers. This could be good if the rover tech hasn't been upgraded that much. I would say this is situational. Aerial elevator. Move to orbit. You can use this executive action to move to orbit. Near the end of the game, you should be mostly staying on the Mars side, but you could use aerial elevator to move up to orbit and produce, and time it so the next turn you can return to Mars. Additionally, moving to orbit makes your workers available. I think the utility of moving to orbit at any time makes this an always take. Shelters. Casino. Gain 2 crystals. This obviously needs a scientist, but it opens up other executive actions if you're having a hard time gaining crystals. Useful if you need some more flexibility with executive actions or if you aren't getting enough crystals. Situational. Gym. Construct a shelter, boostable for extra tech. You start with shelter tech, but of the similarly typed blueprints, I think this one is the most universally useful. Shelters give you crystals and increase your worker capacity. Pair this with the rocket tech to score a bunch of points and boost more actions. Always take. Library. Take one blueprint, boostable to get more. Blueprints are central to this game. I designate this one as always take. Command Center. This allows you to move the rover as an executive action. The rover allows you to hunt for crystals and the free tech upgrades at the edges of the board. As an executive action, it's very useful. I'd say this is always take. After all of that, it turns out many of the blueprints are very good, and you can only take one executive action per turn. Other players will also be competing for blueprints, so make the best of what you can. The plant, oxygen, and shelter blueprints all have 3 of 4 blueprints that I designate as always take. Ultimately, it depends on the blueprints out, but I'm looking to take the geochemist, biochemist, or systems engineer in most games. The game is randomized with missions, tech, LSS upgrades, and blueprints, so the strategy will be somewhat different across each game. In summary, you can keep in mind the 3 commonalities across games: gaining and upgrading tech, building shelters and welcoming ships, gaining blueprints, and building advanced buildings. Buy a scientist that synergizes with a good early blueprint, or if there's a good blueprint that will come out later that works with your setup, hire that scientist instead. Diversify the complexes you build and set yourself up to be able to stay mostly on the Mars side of the board in the second half of the game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.